Growing up, I lived in 2 different Muslim countries. I got a first-hand view of how a Muslim country actually works, functions, how the people interact, and how they interacted with me, who obviously was not a Muslim. One of the countries was in Black Africa, and the other country was in Northern Arab Africa, which the Arabs had slaughtered all the Africans. This is why I vehemently try and spread the news about Egypt to people trying to say that Egypt was Arab the whole time, or something ridiculous like that. They don't realize that after Islam was instituted, that the tribesmen took to the Great Jihad and slaughtered much of the Middle East, much of Northern Africa, to the point where we have Northern African nations being Arab and not black anymore. It's only in the deep, deep desert that of those countries do you find black Africans again. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this, or why am I discussing this? I'm discussing this to tell you that Muslims or Islam is nothing more than the brand new boogeyman. We had the Cold War before, and the enemy of the Cold War were the Russians. The Russians. We had Nixon, Kennedy doing their part to pretend that the Russians were the boogeyman. And we know that when Reagan took office, that we had the final true story of what was really going on, that the Russians were actually trying to keep up with us and not the other way around. And by trying to keep up with us, they went broke. Not that they went broke, but they were broke from way back when, way back during Kennedy era. And we have it, I have it on good authority that the whole Cuban Missile Crisis was actually engineered by the CIA and some of his advisors. The Kennedy was given satellite photographs of Cuba and told that Cuba was creating missile bases to attack the United States. Kennedy looked at the actual photographs and said he saw nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's in his memoirs, which were just made available to the public for public perusal. He agreed with it regardless of what he thought. He agreed with it anyway. And they went ahead with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we all know how that turned out. And then, of course, we had the Cuba embargo from then on. And it's all part of the Cold War, that communism is spreading and what have you. Now, that's not to say that communism did not spread to Cuba. It's just that it was more of a despot more than a communistic nation. I don't think they're doing very well by any stretch of the imagination, though, right? If China fell, Russia fell, various other Eastern Asia countries fell, all who tried to subscribe to communism, obviously it doesn't work. But that was the Red Scare, the Cold War, and Reagan did away with the Cold War. No more boogeyman for the Russians. Russians were no longer the boogeyman. Now we have a new boogeyman. The new boogeyman has become Islam. Now, why is this? It's because people Americans are fairly stupid. I don't mean fairly stupid. I mean just uneducated altogether. I know this is going to step on a whole bunch of people's toes. Oh, how can you say I'm uneducated? Because I've lived in Islamic countries. I know what they do and they don't do. I know that the common person in a Muslim country acts just like a common person in the United States. And no, they're not sitting in tents and have harems. They are farmers, workers, what have you, whatever they are. They're regular people. Humans are humans. I know this is a shock to you, but I want to harken back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and what I said, that it was an entire orchestrated ordeal that the president had absolutely no compunction to go through with, but they said, oh, trust us. And then they went ahead with their failure of a Cuban Missile Crisis and the assassination attempts, right? Because Castro is such a horrible man. And I'm not defending Castro whatsoever, nor his butcher, Che Guevara, right? Is that his name? They just simply need a boogeyman. Why? Because that's what the big corporations want. And then we have Obama. Obama, who has come along and started the Cold War all over again. Obviously, Muslims and Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL isn't enough. You know, we have to have a bigger boogeyman, because I couldn't find a picture of Obama sitting with an empty chair, if you know what I mean. And what do I mean by that? Because ISIS and ISIL is not a country. There's not a leader that he could sit across from and talk to and negotiate peace or negotiate trade agreements or negotiate a ceasefire with. Oh, but with Russia and China, he can sit across from somebody. And that's how he reinitiated the Cold War, because you have to have an actual boogeyman. Now, I don't know if the United States orchestrated this whole Ukraine thing, and what I mean is by themselves, but they certainly are. Europe is certainly going along with the whole Ukraine, Russia's bad thing. I say it's all a bunch of lies. I told you I lived in 2 different Muslim countries. I didn't have a problem. I was basically there on vacation at the time. I don't mean vacation. I mean away from college. So my time was spent partying, lounging around, meeting people, going out, eating at restaurants and stuff like that, getting out of arranged marriages. But that was my experience with Muslim countries. It wasn't the great boogeyman that they're pretending Islam to be. Now, here's what you really have to ask yourself. Is it possible that just as they orchestrated the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, and in fact, Kennedy said there was nothing there. He saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. But they still wanted him to go through with the operation. Now, how long ago was that? That was in the 60s? You don't think they could orchestrate an entire enemy? Now, I just did the video on Charlie Hebdo, and I told you, and I pointed to the evidence, that the people doing the attack were white people. Blue-eyed white people. Eyewitness accounts saying that they were blue-eyed, speaking Arabic with a French accent. You don't think they can orchestrate this entire Islam is so horrible, so heinous, and we know for a fact that the beheadings of the ISIS people, those videos, were all faked. I showed you that it was done with a green screen. Hollywood production, and they have a better sound studio and green screen studio than I have. I wish I had their equipment. Oh, I wish. That's faked. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that the entire whole anti-Muslim thing. Now, we know that 911 was faked. It wasn't done by Muslims. To this day, the attackers, half of the attackers are alive and well that they said were in the planes that hit the towers. Alive and well. And in fact, a few of them have sued the federal government for defamation of character. Why? Because they're actually pilots in Saudi Arabian Airlines. They have sued the federal government. Go look it up. This whole notion of, oh, well, I think we should have a debate. I don't believe that it was a false flag. I think it was all true. Hello, they're alive. They have sued the federal government for defamation of character. I already made a video all about it, went through all of the supposed attackers. I don't even have to go through whether or not the tower was in free fall, whether or not building 7 was blown up. I don't have to go through that. I already know it was orchestrated. Why? Because the attackers are alive. You can't have attackers fly planes into buildings, the plane blow up, catch the building on fire, and yet the attackers are alive and well in Saudi Arabia, flying airplanes and have been for 10, 15, 20 years, but somehow they're named by the FBI within an hour of the attack by some alleged pristine passports that was supposedly on the airplane that blew up in a ball of fire that was so hot that it melted the steel in the building, which was actually in the building was made specifically to take terrorist attacks and is above the flashpoint that any airplane could ever cause. That means that the steel in the building was so tough that it would resist the temperature of any airplane coming in and crashing in it with all of the fuel that's in the airplane. So it's impossible that this could have occurred the way they explain. Impossible. Outside of the realm of possibility. In our reality, could not occur how they said it. I don't even have to go into that. I don't have to go into that because the attackers are alive. I can't say my neighbor came here and robbed me and I shot him dead and the next day my neighbor is walking around, right? Those two stories cannot be in the same realm of possibility. Now, if they can orchestrate that, killing 3,000 people, if not more like, what is it, like 5,000? We still have to consider the people on the plane. We still have to consider, and airplane parts dropping out of the sky that were retrieved from people's neighborhood and nothing ever mentioned about it in the news. If they can orchestrate all of that, they can orchestrate Charlie Hebdo. They can orchestrate all of these black people supposedly going crazy and shooting up military bases where people walk around with weapons all day long. All the MPs are walking around armed. I've been on a military base before. I know the general public hasn't, but I know I have. In fact, I go to one all the time. Still, if they can orchestrate all of that, they can completely orchestrate that Islam is this big, huge boogeyman. And in fact, it was so bad after 9/11 that the Muslims in this country had to hire lawyers because the CIA and FBI was coming up, picking up people's kids and throwing them in jail without so much as a hello, hi, how you doing? And the parents are walking around wondering where the kid is. Oh, they've taken them without saying anything because now we have the Patriot Act. We can do that. We can just pick up your kid and throw him in jail in some hole somewhere. My kid's middle class. He's a straight A student. He's not a terrorist. We're middle class. We're upper middle class. We don't have to do that. Get my damn kid back. They had to hire lawyers and they had to pass laws that said you can't target Muslims. This is not World War II. We're not interning Japanese. Muslims are not the new Japanese that you can just throw them in some hole somewhere without so much as a lawyer, phone call, anything. Hi, we're a Muslim family that's been in the country for 3 generations already. Tell your retarded president that we still have a constitution and the Patriot Act is unconstitutional. If they're doing false flags all the way to World War I, and I've already told you about false flags. I have several videos talking about false flags now. If they can do that now, if they're doing that way back then, you know they've perfected their game. You know that they are just all over it. I'm not saying go hug a Muslim. I'm saying question your government. Question the stories that you're being told. I told you that we have on record that the U.S. federal government has paid the Muslim Brotherhood millions of dollars. It's on record. If they're paying the Muslim Brotherhood, and we have inclinations that they're paying ISIS. I know that they supplied weapons to ISIS, now called ISIL. I don't know why they're called ISIL, but okay. We know that their videos are faked. Apparently Al-Qaeda died when they did the false story of Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden dying. We think both of those are faked. Why do I think the Saddam Hussein thing was faked? Because in the pictures that they took of the Saddam Hussein capture and killing, there are trees that only bloom in the summertime, and at the time it was winter. We already know that some of the videos that you saw from Osama bin Laden were faked because the person who did them came out and said, "Hi, I'm an actor. We faked those videos." Osama bin Laden had been dead 10, 11 years previously because he had a fatal blood kidney disease that he could not survive. And one of our chief people, several people around the world said that he had died in 2001. Remember, the Saudi royal family is an ally to the United States. I mean, they blatantly lie to you, the American population. They blatantly lie and take you for fools. If they can orchestrate all that, they can definitely orchestrate this entire whole Islam is the new boogeyman. And when all else fails, we're going to go back to the default Cold War, because the Cold War, and during the Cold War, the government could take over factories and tell them to print what they want, to make what they want, and use up resources for nothing. But the military-industrial complex has now switched from being a military-industrial complex to the new Obamacare complex. Do you know that a major contractor for Obamacare used to make a whole bunch of military stuff? They have switched. Obamacare is a boondoggle for all of these people. It is a godsend. They don't have to go to war. They don't have to hire people. They can print out Obamacare things and be the resource for Obamacare. You see how deep this goes? Anyway, thank you for watching the Shikama Live Show.